So I want to welcome everybody from wherever you are coming from, and I'd like to recognize that we're on the lands of the unceded territory of the Seashell First Nation. Now, what I want to talk about tonight is explore the universe autumn targets. We started this months ago, and we introduced the program when we started going through all the programs from the spring and summer onwards. So we've gotten to the autumn now. But just as a very brief review, we've got all kinds of observing programs in the RASC. This is just one of them, and you can get yourself certificates and pins. And the Explore the Universe program, you don't need anything more complicated than binoculars. You find half of the 110 objects that are required. You get a certificate and a pin. You don't even have to be a member of the RASC. And there, ladies and gentlemen, is the new third edition. It's just come out from the printers. One of the projects I've been working on for months. So we have an even better manual to work with. So to do the Explore the Universe, the requirements are you get 12 of 24 constellations of bright stars. You get 16 of 32 objects from the moon. You get 5 of 10 solar system, 12 of 24 deep sky objects, and half of the 20 double stars. And so the constellations are these ones right here. And the reason that these particular ones were chosen is because, as you can see from the magnitude list, these are the brightest stars. And if you've ever set up a telescope, which is a go-to, and you're going to do star alignments, and the thing, you get to the point where it gives you a list of stars, which stars do you want to choose? This is going to be the list. These are the stars you're going to be looking at. So this is why they want to make people familiar with these particular constellations and these stars, because they're something you're going to use, even if you're not using go-to. So the autumn constellations with their bright stars that we're going to work with tonight are these four: Andromeda, Cassiopeia, Aries, and Perseus. So let's take a look at those. There is the great square of Pegasus, which looks empty until you get in there with a telescope. There's all kinds of stuff going on in there. Over here, attached to it, that's Andromeda. And some of the targets that we're going to be looking at tonight are in that. Up here is the bent W of Cassiopeia, right there in the middle of the Milky Way, which is pretty easy to find. And there are targets up there. Over down here is that bent line, which is Aries. And there's interesting stuff down there. And finally, over here, we have Perseus. And one of the targets is right in the middle of that. So I'm going to be coming back with more constellations and bright stars with the final presentation this winter. So briefly, for the other stuff, for lunar phases, that's pretty simple. You just have to find some of these phases and make notes of the times. For the lunar basins, these are pretty easy. I found this really interesting piece of art here. It was a NASA picture of the moon that somebody modified to make this, the Maria, the seas, actually look like seas, so they stand out. They're quite easy to find. And the craters, these are the craters that are involved, as you can see from this picture right here. I mean, they're huge. You can see them easily with binoculars. So these aren't really terribly challenging. You should be able to pull that off quite easy. For the solar system, 5 of 10, I mean, all you need to do is find some planets. You can actually plot the orbital motion of one of the planets is one of the challenges. You can observe 3 artificial satellites, including spacecraft in the ISS, and those are quite easy to find. You go to heavensabove.com and you can find the flight paths and times for all kinds of things like that. You could even go after sunspots if you've got the proper observing equipment, and we have done presentations on that in the past. There are optional ones. You can go after eclipses. There aren't any happening in the near future, so we're not going to worry about that. Conjunctions, meteor showers, beginning of the winter, there'll be the Geminids. There's always some showers going on, but those are a possibility. Aurora are not something we normally are able to see down here, but the sun's getting more active, so who knows. Zodiacal light is something, though, because this is something that's viewed after dusk in the western sky in February, March, and in the pre-dawn sky in September and October, which is where we are now. So if you happen to be up early in the morning, this might be something you want to look for, because this is that light reflected off of the dust out there, a lot of which we understand from recent studies is coming from the dust storms on Mars, believe it or not. We can even go after dwarf or minor planets. So the deep sky objects, here's the whole year. These are all the ones, all 24 of them, and we're going after those ones in the autumn category there, these 3. And here they are. We're going to Andromeda for the Andromeda Galaxy. We're going to Perseus for the lot 20, the Alpha Persei group. And we're going for the double cluster at Perseus. So there is that bent W of Cassiopeia. Again, a very easy asterism to find, one of my favorite star hopping things. And if you look at the middle star Navi, you go down to Cap and Shadar there, which form one half of the W. It's an arrow which basically points over towards where the Andromeda Galaxy is. But if you go over to the middle star in Andromeda, Merak, and you come back in the other direction along that line of stars, basically it all converges in that part of the sky. If you've got a dark sky, this is an object you should be able to see with your naked eye. And I have seen it from our observatory on good nights. So not a terribly difficult thing to find. As just an aside, not that this is one of the targets on the list, but if you go in the other direction from Merak, about the same distance, there's the Triangulum Galaxy. And if you're working on your Messier list, well, hey, that's one of the things you're going to be looking for. So this is the closest large galaxy to Earth. There are closer galaxies, the Magellanic Clouds, for example. 2.54 million light years away. It's about 220,000 light years across. It's about 1 trillion stars. It's bigger than our galaxy, about 1.76 times. It can be seen with the naked eye, like I said, and it's heading directly for us. So in about 4.5 billion years, we're going to collide with this galaxy. So it's just getting bigger and easier to see all the time. Malat 20 is an open cluster in Perseus, and it's basically centered on the star Mirfak. And you can see here Mirfak in the middle of the circle there. And those stars that are around it, that is Malat 20 or Calendar 39. It's on both of the lists. You can see Mirfak is the brightest star in this image here, and all of those blue-hued B stars that you see around it, that's the cluster. There, Mirfak is the most luminous one, obviously. It's a supergiant, and it's a magnitude 2. It's about 560 light years away. It's about 172 parsecs. Its core radius is about 11.4 light years, and it's got about 517 stars in the entire cluster. About 50 to 70 million years old. It's a good target to look at. Double cluster. Again, if we're looking at Cassiopeia, and we use the middle star and we go over to the other side here and draw a line out, that's basically where it's going to be. And this is another object that you can see quite easily with a naked eye, definitely with binoculars. It's 2 clusters side by side. It's a challenge if you're using the big telescope at the observatory, because unless you're using an ultra wide field eyepiece on the thing, you can't get the whole thing into the eyepiece. You see more of it actually in the viewfinder scope than you do in the main scope, unless you want to zoom in on part of the cluster. So about 12.5 million years old. It's about 300 blue-white supergiant stars in each of the clusters, and they're both approaching Earth at about 39 kilometers per second. So they're getting bigger and easier to see all the time as well. About 7,500 light years away. And we will be back with more deep sky objects in the winter. The autumn was just shorter than the sun. So there's the double and multiple stars for the entire program. And you can see again, autumn and winter is a fairly short list. So we'll take a look at these double stars here. In Cygnus, we've got 16 Cygni, Taurus, Theta 1 and 2. And in Cepheus, we've got Delta Cephei. So for 16 Cygni, there is the Northern Cross, which is the constellation Cygnus. And you can see over on one wing there, right down there, just off of the one side of the wing, that's where you're going to find it. We zoom in. You can see that the star on the end there, Polaris 1 and Iota Cygni, if you draw, just continue the line out just a little off, that's basically where you're going to find it. There are other stars up in the top there. You can see Omicron Cygni. That's a very good target. That's not on this list. I don't know why, but This one is the one that they wanted people to go after, and it looks like that. It's two stars very close together in a pretty busy star field because we're, in the Milky Way here. Theta Tauri, 1 and 2. That is the Hyades cluster with Aldebaran, which is a very, very bright star in one corner, this triangle, which cultures all over the world have seen. On one edge, halfway down, you find Theta Tau right there. And it looks like that. It's quite an easy one to spot. It's a pretty bright cluster. Delta Cephei, there's that leaning over shed. This Cepheus. Someone's in a truck. And down off of one corner there, where the arrow is, that's basically where you're going to find Delta Cephei, just off to one side. And it is a very, very tight binary. You've got one very bright one with a smaller one next to it, so you'll need to look closely. Good magnification to see that. So we'll be back with more double stars for the winter program. One of the things that they added to the new edition of the Explore the Universe is variable stars, and in particular Myra and Algol, and they're in this part of the sky, so this is something that you might want to look into, but again, it's an optional thing. So there are other programs you can also get into. Explore the Moon is one that I've done. It's a very simple program. It's a similar sort of deal. You have to be a member for this one, but it's 94 features, 40 if you're using binoculars. There's 2 versions of the program. It's not as challenging as Isabel Williams, and I'll get to that in a minute, but it's a really good beginning observer program if you're trying to get into lunar stuff. Isabel Williamson just completed that. It's a detailed program. It's got a lot of stuff in it. If you're into geology, this is your program. Like, I'm not, but I did it because I wanted to, take on the challenge. And it's a really good detailed program that gets you into all kinds of stuff to do with the lunar surface. The Messier program, that's one that I've encouraged people to get involved in. It's basically going through the entire Messier list. It is possible to do it all in one night. I wouldn't want to try it. It makes more sense to spread it out over the entire year. But I mean, it's a very good program. Finest NGC is another one that I've done. It's another 110 object list. All kinds of really good stuff to see in there. Deep Sky Challenge, I'm most of the way through this one. And this is an excellent list. It does not overlap with the NGC list, but it's more challenging. You will need a larger telescope if you're going to take this one on, because these are objects that are more, they're deeper into the sky, harder to find. Deep Sky Challenge has got 45 objects in it, and it's got a lot of nebulae. You're going to probably need filters to see some of these. Deep Sky Gems was one of the newer programs until recently. It was based on David Levy's book. I have gone through a lot of this. I'm actually talking to the observing program about this because they describe all galaxies as round or comet-like, which drives me nuts because it's an advanced list and like, hey, tell me whether it's an elliptical or a barred galaxy or whatever, because I mean, they're all round, we're working on that. But it does have some interesting stuff in it. It's worth looking into. And it's got 154 objects, so it's probably the largest list that I've mentioned so far. But again, some really good stuff in there. Solar observing, just briefly, we don't have a solar observer program, but we do have an observer's handbook, and we do spend a lot of hours doing this. So if the people are interested, come and see Mike or some of the rest of us. We've all had some experience with it. Now, what's happened just in the last few months is the observing committee has come up with a double star list. They haven't actually put it out there. They're beta testing it right now. This is going to be a really good program. It's got a lot more double stars than the 3 that I mentioned in the talk tonight. And if you're interested in this, I can share the list with you. I've got it here somewhere, and you can have a go at it. We haven't actually got it started as a program, but if you want to have a go and test it out, we'd be happy to have you do that. And if you complete it, you'll certainly get a certificate once we have that all sorted out. So that's something to get into. The other one is this, and this is my project. And what happened was, I was telling you about the Deep Sky Gems program, and I had basically told them about the galaxy description thing, but one other thing was on there, they had an asterism, and I said, well, hey, this is an advanced list, what are we doing with an asterism on here? And a bunch of people came on and said, hey, I love asterisms. And of course, I mean, this is Danny's thing. I mean, whenever we're the observatory, he's down there showing people the coat hanger or Campbell's Cascade or whatever. I mean, it's great, it's fun. So I went, you know what? We don't have a program, why don't we create one? So I went out and I'd seen somebody share a list with me about 7 years ago. And it turned out it was a list that was put together by the Astronautical League in the States in 2016. And it wasn't very good. I mean, it was grammatically screwed up and there were a bunch of, but it was a start. It was about 110 objects. So I went out there and researched it and came up with a list of 177 telescopic objects. Now the list is done. And if any of you would, Danny's seen an earlier version of it, but there's a newer edition, Danny, so I should share that with you. He actually contributed to this list, so thank you very much. But if this is something you'd like to look into and look at all these different weird and wonderful things that people have seen in the sky, this is a fun thing to do. And I'd be happy to share that with you right now. It hasn't officially become a program yet. It's still being put together, but we've got the list to work with. Now, this led to me thinking, because when I got this list together, I mean, I know people all over the world have seen things in the sky. This isn't complete. This is a list that's a bunch of old white guys put together. We can do better than this. So, anyway, I mean, this list has got things like the coat hanger, Calendar 399. I mean, there it is. Looks like the coat hanger right next to the constellation Sagittarius there. Campbell's Cascade, which you can kind of see running down through the a diagonal through the screen there. It was named by an astronomer who put this in Sky and Telescope in 1980, but the person who actually discovered it was a member of the RASC. I think he discovered it when he was a member of the Calgary Center. He passed away in 1999, but here he is. There, Father Campbell. He was a Catholic priest and an astronomer. And if you go to Camelot Pardalis, the triangle there, you can see it goes right through one side of the triangle. So, like I was saying, those are wonderful, those are great, but asterisms, they're all over the world. So what ended up happening is I started looking at all the different sky cultures I could lay my hands on, and so far it is 116. And you're probably wondering, well, how many asterisms did you get from all those cultures? Well, the answer is 1,458. And it's interesting because there were things that I never expected to find. One is that in a lot of parts of the world, primarily in the Southern Hemisphere, they're not looking just at stars, they're looking at dark places in the sky, like the Coalsack Nebula, which is kind of cool. But even the Arabs are doing some of that. And some cultures, they have hundreds. I mean, this is basically how they organize their sky. Chinese, Xinguans, the Koreans, they have hundreds of them. They include everything in the sky. Some were a real challenge, like First Nations, because of residential school and someone trying to erase culture. It was difficult to find pieces, and people were still putting pieces together. And some centers of the RASC have been very active in this, like the Halifax and Calgary Center. But the largest, there is one set of cultures, the Dene. There's about 19 tribes, and they have one asterism in the sky. It takes up the entire sky. You know, like it's called the tailed man. The tail is the handle of the Big Dipper, but the eyes are down at Betelgeuse and Bellatrix, and the hands over there at Cassiopeia, and you know, it's all over the whole sky. It's just one big asterism. I mean, why would you need any more? It's just it's everything. You know, it's fabulous. But to give you kind of an idea of the kind of stuff, this is Chinese Xinguans, and they have absolutely everything in the sky, including a toilet, right there. And right down here, you find a star, which is called excrement, and a circle around it, you find grandfather, son, and grandson. I think there is some sort of a story here about somebody's training here, I'm guessing. Anyway, I mean, so this is going to be a really interesting list. If you would like to see the list, the actual table, the current draft, I'd be happy to share it with you. It's basically, it's still being, fine-tuned, but it's done. The text that goes with it that describes in detail every single one of these is still being edited. It'll be about another 2 weeks. But if you'd like to see it and have fun with it and look at some of these wonderful things that are up there, I'd be happy to show it to you. Just a reminder, we got Lonerscapes if you need them. We have our observatory, which hopefully we will be able to get going with soon. And we even have a loner scope up there that we inherited from our dear friend Nairn Robertson, who unfortunately is no longer with us, but was a wonderful kid. And we'd like to see people use that. So that's my presentation. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Let's see.
Yeah, it's great, Charles.
Okay, so Charles, I was trying to follow you along using Stellarium. The Chinese ones in that, are they available in Stellarium too? Is there?
Yes, Stellarium doesn't have all of the cultures that I have. It has, I think, 4 of the first North American First Nations and 3 Australian, and they have Tongan and Lakono and Anatwana and Hawaiian. They have a few Pacific cultures. They have 3 different versions of the Chinese Xinguans. They have Korean. They have Japanese as far as their moon stations or their lunar mansions, but no further than that. But then Chinese, Korean, and Japanese all overlap. I mean, they got a lot of the same stuff. So some of this you can see on Stellarium for yourself, but if you were trying to find a list that gave you, this is the location and these are the stars, they don't have it on there. That's what I've been doing. I've been going through and finding all the stars and all of right ascension, declination, all that stuff. But there's a lot of lists that Stellarium has started but not got on their computer yet, and there are lists that they haven't even gone to, like this tailed man, which is the whole sky thing, is something that was discovered in 2014 by a bunch of researchers who were working with Dene and the Gwich'in specifically up north. And so there's all kinds of little bits and pieces that come from all different places. But yeah, it's a work in progress, because I'm sure that someone's going to look at it and say, hey, you haven't got mine yet. I mean, there's Sardinian and Macedonian and Slovakian and Croatian constellations and asterisms that I've got in there that have not made it to Stellarium. It's been fun, if you really want to understand the power of the importance of diversity, this is a really good example, because you look at, I've got 22 key asterisms that I've identified, describe right at the very beginning. I say, these are the ones that everybody sees. And so I'm not going to describe them in the text below. I'm going to describe it once, and I'm going to say see above, so it's Orion, it's Scorpius, it's the W of Cassiopeia, the Big Dipper, to a certain extent, the Little Dipper. There are key ones, the sickle at the front of Leo.
Right.
And they appear over and over and over again, but they look entirely different, like Orion, like we figure it's this guy standing there, but if you're Tupi Kawani, the sword is a cast on one of his legs, and he's walking with a stick in his hand is the Hyades cluster, and the Pleiades is a feather in his hat. And I mean, if you're Mari, the 3 stars of the belt is the glittering water is going off the back of Tanui's canoe, and the Hyades is the sail, and the Pleiades is the foam at the front of the boat, and on and on and on and on. Big Dipper. If you're Mi'kmaq, it's Moon and the 7 hunters, and the bucket of the Dipper is there, but then the handle and stars all the way down to Arcturus and Boötes are 7 birds who are hunting him. And, you know, it's this story about how, you know, he comes out of Corona Borealis, which is his den. He gets chased around the sky. They catch him, they cook him, he dies, his spirit goes back into the den, and it goes around and around. They go all these different stories. So I mean, it's fascinating. All these different cultures. Look, the Pleiades and the Hyades. Everybody's got a uniform. Everybody. There's so many. Every single one of those 116 cultures got a uniform. They're all different.
Okay.
You know, they're all different stories. So it's been interesting putting this together. There's been a lot of work, but
It definitely sounds like it. Awesome.
And it's going to be we're going to be the only astronomical society in the world that's got a complete list. So, you know, I'm pretty happy. We're all pretty happy about that. We think this is going to be a big thing. So anyway.
So you mentioned Hyades in your presentation. You talked about a double star that was in the Hyades.
Yes.
And I really
Beta,
like Hyades is an open cluster, is it not?
It is.
Okay.
It's
Is that double star part of it, or is it just located in that region of the sky?
It is.
It's part of it.
It
Okay.
is.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. It has definitely been confirmed as an open cluster. It's in the Malat and Kalinda catalogs.
Okay.
Didn't make it into Messier's list, but then he was looking for little fuzzy blobs and making a list of things that weren't comets, so he didn't pay attention to it. Well, then along comes Pericalinder, and he goes, "Oh, I want that on my list," you know. So yeah. I mean, one of the things in the southern hemisphere I mentioned, the cold sap, it's a dust cloud, and almost nobody paid any attention. It's only in very recent years that it's been included in a couple of lists, and Patrick Caldwell Moore, when he came up with his Caldwell list, he included it. It's number 99 on the list, but you won't be able to see it from our latitude. You're going to have to go way south to see that. And this list that I'm working on has got all the southern stuff too. So there's a lot of stuff that you'd have to go south to see, but it's there, you know. So if you do happen to go south, you can use it to find stuff. And it's except for the telescopic list, which is that 177 objects. This is large scale, which means that there were patterns that were identified by people with just the unaided eye. So you don't need any kind of instruments to see them. They're there. I mean, you can look at some of the smaller ones more closely with binoculars for sure, but you can see them all when they go. So